Well, hello, everybody. I'm Kep Crabb. Thanks for joining us today for Larger Stories Book of the Month webinar series. We're going to be talking today about Dr. Crabb's book, Waiting for Heaven, which was the first book that the Larger Story Press ever published, so we're proud of that. Just a quick announcement before we get started today. Wanted to let you know that next month for the Book of the Month series, we're going to be talking about Dr. Crabb's book, A Different Kind of Happiness. It's actually going to be 1 month from today, on Wednesday, April 27th at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So join us for A Different Kind of Happiness 1 month from today, April 22nd on a Wednesday, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So, I was thinking, we've been doing these Book of the Months now for about 8 months. And so we've been talking about a few of Dad's titles and some of his books. And if we kept going with nothing but Larry Crabb books, we would have 25 more months of material to do. So to say that he was a prolific writer is to say the very least. But we are hoping to use additional authors as well. I'm going to be reaching out to some people that I know Dad really appreciated and that I've appreciated as well, and see if they'll be willing to join me to do a Larger Story Book of the Month with some of their material, which I think will be great. But as I've mentioned a few times before, also Dad, before he passed, left us with 2 manuscripts that he gave to Larger Story to do whatever we see fit with. And we're going to be publishing those at some point. But those 2 efforts that he had towards the end of his life really kind of dovetail into what we're going to be talking about today. Excuse me, as we talk about waiting for heaven. I've often thought as we're talking about waiting for heaven that this could, and I don't think I'm alone, that this really could have been the follow-up to Inside Out. It could have been the Inside Out too. And Dad actually mentions that a little bit in the book that we'll be discussing today, Waiting for Heaven. So before I introduce my guest today, let me just talk a little bit about where Larry was when he wrote this book. This book was published in mid-2020. Usually took Dad, I should say, about 9 months or so to produce a book. So he really wrote this book in 2019, in the early part of 2020, and then we got it and turned it into what you see today. So it was a little bit, about 1.5 years before he actually went home to heaven. And I can hear a lot of his thinking throughout this book as I was reading this coming back from a trip last week, where he talks about to live thirsty. What does it mean to live thirsty and to wait so badly now for something that we really want, that we know we're going to get later? Persevering now. Perseverance seemed to be a word that he always used. Persevering for what's to come. Overcoming temptation and sin for what's to come. One of his favorite lines that he would love to say before he died is, "The best is yet to come." He would love to say that. It reminds me of a little passage that he wrote in this book that I just want to read to you real quickly. He talks about in Waiting for Heaven, he says, "Waiting Christians will more quickly recognize temptation for what it is, an opportunity to arrange for oneself an experience that God promises to provide later. And waiting Christians will discover new strength to resist the allure of such opportunities. Christians who learn to wait," and I love this, "will live a better life now and will die a better death when heaven's gates swing open." Could this be the narrow road to freedom? Dad asks. And then he says, "Lord, teach me to wait." And then he prays, and this is actually a prayer that he pulled from his book, When God's Ways Make No Sense. He says, "Jesus, here I am again, desiring a thing that if I were to indulge in it would war against my heart and the hearts of those I love. In this moment, I might choose to indulge a fleeting hunger, or I might choose to love you more." This is where he talks about the 2 stories here. He says, "Given the choice of shame or glory, I choose glory. Let me choose glory. Given the choice of movement or eternity," and I love this line, he says, "Let me choose in this moment what is eternal." And then he says, "Given the choice of this easy pleasure or the harder road of the cross, give me grace to choose to follow you." He says that, and there's 2 other quick quotes that I just want to read as we get started here, and I'll introduce our guest today. This is also a passage in here. Every time I get a chance to read some of Crabb's books, it just seems like there's so many lines that are just quotable, that you just want to grab hold of and just remember that line. I remember even as a kid standing at the foot of his bed saying, "Dad, give me an introductory paragraph to this paper that I'm supposed to write." And he would just spew those paragraphs out. Oh, but he says this is talking about active waiting. And he says, "I am to never passively wait for the Lord's return as an afterthought." That just grabbed me right there. "With no more valued ambition than to enjoy the good things available now in this world. To live with no infinitely broader perspective than to live in between my birth and my death is to live a wasted life. A life that fails to tell God's larger story by how we relate." The last passage I'm going to read in Waiting for Heaven as we jump into this is the last one. He says, "Wait for tomorrow. Demand nothing today, but enjoy God's blessings today. And yet, whether in blessings or trials, live to love well today." So every time I hear those words, I can just hear Dad talking. And it was fun to read this book and just remember going through that book with him when it was the last one that we had a chance to do together. So my guest today, and some of you might have seen me introduce him at the summit that we just had a few weeks ago. I introduced Kent Denlinger as my big brother, struggling journeyer, and a close friend. And I've known Kent and his wife, Carla, for many decades, and I love them both. So Kent, thanks for joining me today. And how are you doing, my man?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for a chance to be a part of this. This is kind of fun to think about. Although the book is, I wouldn't call it fun. I'd call it thick and challenging. So.
Well, I hope that the conversation that we just got done having for the last 30 minutes, we can continue on, because it could have gone in tons of different directions. But we were chatting, I guess maybe about a month or two ago, and you had mentioned that you just got done reading or were perusing Waiting for Heaven. And I said, "Why don't you join me when we do this webinar?" And that felt very providential. I was super excited. Didn't have anybody in mind to join me. Tell me what was grabbing you about this book as you dove back into it, man.
Well, it's like what we talked about. I've read the book 3 times now, and kind of like what we talked about beforehand. And that's just that for me, it stirred even more than the topic of addiction. It just stirred hope. It just stirred a deeper sense in me of wanting to live hopeful for a better day. And it's made me just think about all the times when I feel, whether it's temptation or just the struggle of aloneness, inadequacy, wondering if your life matters. All those things just feel like what they're doing for me is just kind of eliciting this deep sense of there's just a better day coming. There's a day coming and I want to live in light of that. And it's one of the things I think that your dad did so well, was that he was able to look into those things of the soul and the heart and call us down the road, just to put words to it in a way. I mean, you read that first paragraph that you read, and I thought, gosh, let's just wrap it up here. That was good. And that's, I went back to the book, and I could have, like you said, I could have written out, they're not necessarily quotable sentences, but man, they're lifelines, that you feel like, wow, there's just so much depth in those words. There's so much truth in that I want to know more of.
As you say that, it's interesting, because one of the things I thought about is, we just got done doing the first Larger Story Summit at the Cove. And we had 150 people, and we had a bunch of people online join us for the virtual component, which was really fun. And I was so grateful that the thing went so well. But I'm starting to understand Dad a little bit more, Kent. I really am, man. When he would talk about I don't care and all that stuff. But I'm sitting at the summit thinking this is really fun in a way that I think is bringing Dad some pleasure. I think it's bringing God the Father some pleasure. We're having great conversations with each other that are challenging. We're thinking about what it means to live life now and continue to carry this torch. And I thought, this is about as good as it gets, and it just doesn't seem to hit it anymore. And, I'm starting to realize that we really were built for something more than what we can even try to get here now. And the frustration, I think, comes when you press into this life and that I'm going to make this life work.
Yeah.
And somehow, and I mean, I remember there's a passage Dad talks about in the book where he's talking about, the Christian who, is going to make this life work, and it's going to be a good life, and he's going to have, good ministry, whatever. And then he's going to go to heaven, and it's just going to be even better than that. It's just boom, boom, boom. And I'm thinking, wow, who is that? I've come to the realization that this life is set up to fail. Yeah. And it's set up to be the narrow journey that we're on. And it's painful, and it's a struggle. Yeah. Even in the midst of some real joy.
Well, and your dad knows who I'm talking about, but I had a seminary professor, and his sentence about Genesis 3 is that God rigged the universe so that it doesn't work. And we, of course, apart from God, we're just going to keep trying to make it work. We're going to keep asking people and things to do for us what they were never intended to do. And it's just a core truth throughout this book, throughout almost all of your dad's writings. And yet it's something that the church just hasn't done a good job of. And I don't want to rag on the church. That's not my point. It's just, but it's hard to live thirsty. It just is. And I think people want to believe that Jesus takes that thirst away. And we quote a verse like in John 4, where Jesus says, "Come to me and you'll never thirst again." And yet I say, well, if that's true, then why at the end of the Bible is the last identifiable characteristic of God's people thirst? "Come, you who are thirsty, and drink from the river of life without cost." So I think our thirst is our ticket home. It's that beacon inside of us, honing device, calling us on. And I think Jesus, I think there are moments when he touches our lives and we feel a deep satisfaction, but I don't think that's a permanent thing. I think he was talking about a future thing, really, when he would deeply satisfy us. So at least that's my take on it. But yeah, this idea of thirst is just, and it's behind addiction, obviously. It's just really behind our addiction. And yet we don't do a very good job of, I think we ought to come every Sunday morning, and at some level, something about the church service should remind us and rightfully identify our thirst as being for God. And that it is our thirst that gets us off the path, and it's our thirst that should call us back onto the path, so.
Yeah, man, I just love hearing that, Kent. For me, as I was reading through this too, one of the things that I think really occurred to me is the two stories that really are being told. God's larger story, and really Satan's false story. And what that looks like. And I kept asking myself the question, and Dad asked it in the book all the time, is some of this possible? Is some of this really possible? He talks about the committed Christian in the book, who really is waiting and with that hunger and being aware of their thirst. And I think I've had moments of that. But so often you just miss the mark. And I think that as you sit there and talk about, what's really going on, I wonder, where does real change really occur in people? And what we're trying to do with Larger Story has been, kind of touch Josie and Jake's, my kids' age group, the 20, 21-year-olds to the 25-year-olds, and then to the 35-year-olds, and then to the 50-year-olds like me, and then to the, old, but how do we have an entree into that group of kids that are dealing with a world that's so different? And I, as I was thinking about it and praying about it and reading this book, it really is about there's something bigger than yourself, and you're part of it. And that this life isn't it. This isn't it. I think everyone wants to make this it. And I'm starting to realize, this is a 53-year-old man, how quickly life goes. It's not going to be too much longer till we're all laying on that bed that Dad was laying on, if we're lucky enough to die the way he died. And heaven's really coming. I start to become so much more aware of heaven since his passing. And I think about it all the time. I've said this to you, bro. What's he doing now? What's he doing in heaven now? He's not living by faith or hope anymore.
Yeah.
But he's still living with love.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think that means anything to us unless we're thirsty, unless we're aware of a deeper ache in our soul, the groan that Paul spoke of in Romans 8 and Corinthians. And, I heard a story not long ago. A young man from Africa was asked to give the senior address in seminary, and his friend said, what are you going to talk about? And he said, well, I know what I'm going to talk about. He said, what I want to ask you is, why is it nobody's talking about heaven? He said, back in my country, that's all we ever talk about. partly because he lived in a country in Africa that was suffering all the time, and our comfort and all and convenience and busyness has blinded us to our hope for something more. And until you feel that ache, and that's is where I struggle with, how do we get to the younger generation? There's some level which you got to live life for a certain period of time until some of those things that you're chasing start to run dry,
Yeah.
And maybe what we're doing more than anything is just trying to create some categories that you implant in your kids so that eventually, or the young people, so that eventually they realize, oh yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. I know what they were saying now.
When you talk about the suffering and the struggle, I remember coming home, Kimmy and I are coming home from the summit, and we're in the airport, and our plane was, just one of those days where the airport got all backed up and the planes were just all backed up. And I found myself getting a little irritated. Then I thought, I'm thinking of these Ukrainian people who are, leaving their homes, and this whole notion of just being comfortable. And what does that really look like? And I at some level, I live very comfortably. And I remember the story that a woman told Dad one time years ago, and she was living in Romania, and she was talking to him at a cathedral in the United Kingdom, in England somewhere. And she says, I don't pray very well when I'm in the UK or in America because I'm just too safe.
Hmm.
And, you look at what's really happening with the world today. And, I know that it's always been in chaos at some level, but, what's really going on now? And is there a reformation in the future here that's coming, where people are saying, we know that there's something bigger than what this life is now.
Yeah.
And something that's more important. I mean, I used to think, a buddy of mine used to say, can we live as Christians with the same commitment that the Al-Qaeda terrorist lives with, where he's ready to blow himself up because he wants to get to eternity? Now, I don't think his ideology is very good at all, but man, what a commitment.
Well, and our hope really is going to be in being disillusioned, disillusioned by this world. And young people, I think they're facing more disillusionment than I faced when I was their age. So that's hopeful at one level, as hard as it is, that's hopeful, so.
Well, I think we've talked to a bunch of these young people who, when you start to talk about the notion of heaven, I even think about my niece who's 18. She's getting ready to go to college, and she just got prom queen, and she's super bright, and she's pretty, and she's thinking about her future, and I want to have kids, but I'm thinking, what about the first 20 or 50 million years of your future? What are you thinking about with that? And it's how do you instill that kind of thought? And like you said, I don't know if it's possible. You have to live life and get kicked a little bit before you can understand that, man, this life doesn't work. Yeah. No matter how hard you think you can make it work, or what you think the resources you may have to try to make this life work. Eventually, we all die.
Well, and there is a suffering that doesn't depend on our circumstances. And certainly they're circumstantial, but if we're at all honest, there's a suffering in our souls when we realize that, hey, I got a good marriage, and yet I'm still hungry for something, or my friendships aren't quite what I wish they were, and so we have to broaden the category of suffering, because some people can look at, well, I've never had cancer, or I've never had this, but there's a suffering. It's the groan. Paul said, nobody escapes the groan unless we get addicted to a bunch of things and try and take it away, and
I wish I had the maturity to be aware of that without having to have gone through all the craziness that you have to go through to get there.
Yeah.
And a wife getting terminal cancer, those kind of things that, I wish I had the ability to see what I think I see now a little bit more clearly because of some of those things. It does allow you to detach from this world in a way. Even Dad's passing has allowed me to detach from this world in a way, realizing, I said to you earlier, what's he doing now? When we were talking.
And aren't those God's mercies and grace to you? I mean, we think about mercy and grace in terms of forgiveness of our sin, and certainly that's true, but it's a mercy that Kimmy gets cancer, because of what God's going to do from that. We're not excited about that, but we know down deep that those are opportunities for God to do something in us that it just can't be done apart from some form of suffering. So he has a script for all of us, whether it's whether it's realizing something when you're 60 and going, oh my golly, why didn't I see that when I was 40? Or,
Yeah.
why does cancer have to come into you guys' lives? But there's a script for all of us that, to trust and to believe that somewhere in that he's trying to open our hearts more to who he is and what he's doing.
But our hope is in heaven, and so to have heaven on the forefront of our mind seems to be something that seems important to me. And what it's done to me, and even after having gone through this, Kent, in this, just reading the book again for I don't even know how many times I've read it, but it's been probably a dozen since, but just now getting familiarized with it, it puts heaven on that forefront of my mind, and it makes you want to live a little bit differently. And I mean, and that's been something that I'm really encouraged by. And that's where I think too, I've been talking with my kids about what does it mean to really think about heaven. Yeah. Even as a young kid who's got his and her life ahead of them, in some, who knows, perhaps some very difficult ways, for sure, some challenging ways. I've got a question here. I don't know if anybody's got a question who's watching as Kent and I are talking through this. We've got one question that has been asked, and I just was going to pose this to you real quick. He says, my question relates to doing works of justice. Crabb says that they're good, but not as important as love. I would say that works of justice are part of the gospel because it's working with God to bring the kingdom of earth as in heaven. Revelation 21, 1-4 talks about the great Christian hope of heaven coming here with no more tears, pain, or death. Martin Luther King said they could no longer wait for justice because they've been oppressed for so long. Is the notion of waiting a white Western privilege? Excuse me. What about justice for oppressed people? Telling them to wait seems insulting. Having said that, all this, I love the book. Sorry about the long question. That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. I think we should always fight for whatever justice we can, within whatever means we have. But understanding that we're never going to bring that here. Only God's going to bring that here when he chooses to set all things right. So at some level, even as we go about that work, I think if there isn't some sense of whatever you want to call that, waiting or something, if there isn't some sense of a larger story unfolding, then how we go about fighting for justice is not going to represent the heart of God very well. And that feels really important to me. I think we should, and some people God writes that on their hearts more than others, and they should go about that. But I think something has to undergird that allows us to go about it with some sense of ease and belief in something even deeper than the moment while we're fighting in the moment for something. And I think that's where this idea of waiting for heaven, that there's a day coming when he will set it all right. I don't think I should just flippantly say that to people and say, well, sorry for your hard fortune. No, I think we should fight whatever we can fight, but with an understanding that there's a better day coming. And yeah, so some level of patience and perseverance with that. I don't know if that really answers the question well,
but justice is such an interesting notion because as I'm talking with young kids now, one of the lines that they seem to really say a lot is, oh, that's fair, or that's not fair. And so when you talk about, I just remember that, Dad talking about, the whole notion of sin. And when you talk about justice, and what we really do deserve, that God, through his son took the place, the propitiation of Jesus, that then we all deserve hell. So at some level you talk about oppression, and I appreciate oppression at some level. Maybe I've lived a privileged life in some respect. I think being the son of Larry Crabb too has not only given me certain benefits that other people haven't had, but I've had the chance to ask this guy questions and see his life. And so it just has just had huge impact on me. So I feel so privileged and honored to have been his child. So understanding what justice, when I realized that what I really deserve and what I've seemed to have been given, even in the tough times, compared to some people that really are going through things that I just don't have a paradigm for. All I know is that in respect to justice, it seems to me that we're all in need of the blood, and we're all guilty. And so, I mean, I don't know if I would say waiting is a white privilege notion, because I think all of us, it's all through Scripture talking about waiting on what's coming, and not putting our hope in this world.
Yeah.
It's kind
I
of
suspect whoever asked the question probably could speak to it a whole lot better than you or I can.
Sure. Yeah.
We're giving it a lot of thought, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's so much about this book, so many different directions to go. I think, one of the things that really struck me early on is when he kind of quotes from, like you said, Inside Out, and then he rewrites it. And one of those sentences I think is just so important is he says something like, I wrote it down here: misguided, the misguided focus of using the problems of modern Christianity is a misguided focus on using God to make this life work well, whether by following a list of prescribed behaviors or by creating some spirit blissful experience of faith now. Rather than, this whole idea of waiting for something more, that we're using God for now. And I just thought that's a profound sentence. It's a scary thing, I think, in modern Christianity. It's, I think that's worth a lot of thought.
Yeah. Yeah. I think waiting applies to all of us, because at some level, and again, there's obviously different levels of oppression that we go through in this world. I was even thinking about just, these Ukrainian people and different things. It just is mind blowing. But this is a warfare that Satan's after all of us. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm almost a little bit, and I don't say this flippantly at all, but a little bit jealous of some of those people that are even more oppressed, because, that seems to be the gateway to know Jesus better.
Yeah.
And do I live in this comfortable Christian life that, someone just asked, how's Kimmy doing? Most of them know that, my wife's been battling stage 4 lung cancer. We've gone through some difficult times. She actually had a chance to speak at the summit a few weeks ago, which was really just a miraculous time, just glorious. I just was so excited for her to do that. And it was very much a spirit-led thing. But she's doing really well. And let me tell you what I'm scared about. I'm scared that I'd go back to not depending on the Lord in the way that I felt like I had to, when I learned that she was quite possibly going to die within the next 5 years. And now it seems, again, who knows what tomorrow will hold, but I don't want to lose that dependence. And that, and is it okay now, God, you did your job. Yeah. The good medicine that the doctors have been able to give her, and her bout with chemotherapy, has proven to be, working. So now I'm just back to God, keep doing your job, and I'll try to do mine, as opposed to just living with that dependence, where for a few years there, Kent, I was just clinging to the cross to live.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you can go back. And I think the very fact that you're expressing that longing to not go back, God will honor. I really do. I know you'll have days where you feel like you've gone back, because we all do, but
yeah,
I don't. I think when God does things like that in our souls, man, something gets anchored, and a solidness forms that we'll question at times, but it's really there. And you can't go back, and you're expressing your desire not to. And I think God hears that as a prayer, and he'll honor that. He'll really honor that. So
that's what I want. I want to continue to have that dependence on him in the midst of the deep waters, when waters aren't as deep, because the fact of the matter is the war is always raging. And whether we feel it or don't feel it, or wherever we are, you've got to engage. And I loved what you said at the summit, where it's time for us all to man our posts, because the war is going on. Yeah. But the nice thing is we're all waiting for heaven. And that's what makes manning the post worthwhile, because that's where our hope is. And I just am so taken with that notion now, in ways that, quite frankly, 2 years ago, and certainly 20 years ago, I wasn't even close to. Because you think about heaven in a way now that's very different. And now that my dad's there in heaven, even though my grandfather's there and different people that I've known and loved, but now it's Dad. And I still see his picture. I have his ashes sitting above my desk. I always just look a little shrine to Dad, I guess. And it's just kind of, it's to keep me centered, keep me focused on what's to come. How in the moments of temptation, in the moments of depression, in the moments of when you feel like life has got you beat down, how do you live in the hope that is ours to live in, that is heaven, because that is our hope. If it's all true. And I believe it is. And so thank you for that question about Kimmy. She's doing great.
One of the real tests for me is, how do I live this out right now when I keep getting a Charlie horse in my leg that about knocks me out of my chair?
Well, bro, I mean, we could keep going on this, and we're certainly not here trying to fill up time. That's not what we do. But I'm just grateful, Kent, that you agreed to do this with me and chat about this. I didn't know, what to expect as we think about this book together, but it's changing my life as I continually start to keep heaven now in the forefront of my mind. It changes the story that I'm telling at the moment. Am I telling God's larger story as I'm interacting with my wife, as I'm talking to my friends, as I'm living my life? Or am I telling Satan's false story of trying to make this life work in ways that it just won't? And try to, you cling to this world in ways that, may give you some temporary satisfaction, but ultimately it just isn't life. And I'm starting to taste a little bit more of that all the time. And I'm just so grateful for that, for the life that Dad showed us in how he lived, man. He loved Jesus, and he wanted the Spirit to lead his way. And I said to you before we jumped on this call, here we are a year plus now after he's passed. And I don't think I miss him any less. And I don't think his impact is any less. I'm more motivated now than ever. We just got done shooting the first digital video course for Larger Story. Just got back from Atlanta, and it could not have gone better. So many people were praying for that. And I think it has the opportunity to let the Spirit use it in a way that can maybe draw people to himself. So
that's wonderful.
It was cool.
Yeah, I will just say this about the book. One of the things I love about the book is it takes a topic that's so pertinent and doesn't make the topic, in a sense, the focus. That the topic itself of addiction fits into this larger sense of what goes on in the human soul. And that's what your dad was so good at. Like, even the whole idea that addiction, underneath addiction, whether it's to alcohol or sex or too much eating or shopping or whatever it is, beneath that really ultimately is an addiction to self. The real problem is self-addiction. And now we're into a bigger category. I love that about what he's able to do with stuff like this, is to be able to see what's beneath the surface and to really speak to that. And if there's hope, it isn't going to be because we muster up the courage to try and not have another drink or not eat too much food or whatever. It's going to be out of brokenness and repentance.
Yeah.
It's the only way. It's the only way to get free of addiction, whatever free. And coupled with that is the fact that I just love that your dad kept saying, I got it written down here, quick caveat. He says, I believe there is no path to walk that eliminates the struggle to resist temptation or that guarantees no further failure. And that to me is just something you almost got a tattoo on the front of your brain, because I think that we're in this quandary all the time between we were made for a place that's perfect, and that's where we're going. And so we live with this constant hunger for things to be right. And yet we live in between all of that, and we live with this ache. So we want things to work, and that's partly why addiction works so powerfully, because it pulls us towards something. But at the same time, we're not there yet, and so we're in this constant tension in our souls, I think. And it's just that ongoing battle that there's no way to ever fully get beyond the struggle here. And anybody who's preaching a gospel, and I think this is Galatians and Colossians, anybody who's preaching a gospel that says you can rise above the struggle and the battle of sin is preaching a false gospel.
No doubt.
And I just think that's what Larry does so well in stuff like this, is he communicates things that you think, wow, I'm a mess and I can't be very mature. And he suddenly says, well, that's part of maturity. That's part of embracing that.
Yeah.
Is part of maturity. And that I think that's incredibly freeing.
I do too, Kent. I do too, so much. And when you are talking about the whole notion of self, something we talked about in the course development is, the one thing we come out of the womb really good at is loving ourselves, and self, and all these different things that culture then continues to put on you. And that's why I think scripture says, love your neighbors as you love yourself, because we're pretty good at loving ourselves.
Yeah.
And so what does it mean? That whole flesh spirit battle is so important. And I think just an awareness of what's coming and the belief in that and the hope of that is what I think allows us to move through some of these things now that otherwise I don't think we could.
Well, and the other thing your dad does well in the book is he redeems concepts that many of us have heard all our lives. Like, for instance, it comes down to choice. I mean, I was almost surprised he ends up there in the book, but it's how's he say it? Like well informed, and I got it written down here. Let me, it's choice based on well informed and meaningfully influenced, and then he unpacks that. So he recaptures things that we've always heard. Hey, wait for heaven. Well, I heard that as a youngster at communion, and I didn't, what are we supposed to do? Sit around here and talk about riding on the clouds, or what does that mean? It didn't mean much to me. And, hey, you have freedom of choice, and that really, it matters, and most of that, what growing up just meant, just bite the bullet and make hard, and your dad just always goes back, he comes back around to those truths that were even true back then, but with new meaning to it, and a way of thinking about it that doesn't feel like I'm just trying to buck up and pull up my bootstraps and make it happen. It's coming out of something else that deeper. And that's where I find myself wanting to keep reading the book, because I want that to sink down in a little bit more to understand what's he really saying there, because there's something there. There's something really there that's true that I've always heard, but now he's coming at it with more depth and meaning to it. And I love that. I love that.
I've said this on many of the Book of the Month webinars, is these are books that should go on your annual reading list, that you have to read over and over again to start to really have them sink in a little bit. And what does it mean to stay focused on heaven, which then really takes power away from addictions and self. You have to die to self.
I think one more thing that I wouldn't want to, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, and that's just when he gets to those couple chapters, maybe around 10 or somewhere in there, where he starts talking about the Trinity, and what we're really invited into at the core of the gospel. My understanding of the gospel growing up was, I'm saved from my sin. I get a ticket to heaven and not hell. And right. I mean, that's the entry level. And yet that, for a lot of people, that's all they ever learn. And it's like, no, I'm invited into the community of the Godhead to participate in their purposes and to discover a joy in that comes from knowing that I'm loved and that his life is in me, can be poured out. And man, that's just, your dad, I found a quote that he wrote years ago, and I remember reading this one time, and he goes, I read it at an SSD, and it was in a journal article. And he goes, man, who wrote that? That was really good. And I said, you did. And he kind of, yeah, here's what he said. He said, most Christians would strongly affirm their belief in a triune God, but in a way that says, I know it's true, but I'm not sure why it's important. The doctrine of the Trinity establishes relationship as the foundation of everything Christian. Once we take seriously the idea of three persons who are one God, we are immediately caught up in a mystery. And something about the final order of things remains hopelessly unexplained. But boy, in the center of this book, your dad, he ends up back there almost as if, and I think it's true, he was just discovering something in the latter part of his years. And if you want to think about this more, I'd say get on the website whenever the workshops from the summit event, because Trip Moore did an incredible job of unpacking this idea. And I think it's worth listening to, and it's worth really thinking about, what is this gospel? It's more than just I'm saved and I get a ticket to heaven.
It reminds me of the story that Dad was talking with Broughton Knox in South Africa at one point, overlooking a scene of just incredible poverty. And Broughton says to Dad, I'm just now starting to, and this is an 80-plus-year-old theologian. Dad's probably not even 40 years old at the time. And he said, I'm just now starting to understand the implications of the gospel. And that's just so powerful. And Dad realized that I need to listen to that, because there's something way bigger than I just got a ticket to heaven, but what is it doing now? And that's where waiting for heaven with that eager anticipation of what's to come can change how you live today.
Yeah.
And we got a little tiny taste of that at the summit a few weeks ago. I know some of you who joined us at the summit we just really enjoyed that time with you all. And we're hoping to do that again and maybe expand on that in some ways. But this has been so fun, Kent. I just love chatting with you, bro. I mean, it's fun to see your face. I told you earlier, it's fun because I used to do this with Dad, and I could just, even though he was 2,000 miles away, I still felt like I was sitting next to him. So
yeah, it's always sad at one level because I feel like, wow, I wish people could have heard the 30 minutes before we came on here and started recording, because that was pretty rich too. And even through the years, even as a pastor, we'd get together sometimes and talk about it with several elders or people, a small group, and we'd talk about a topic, and we'd talk about maybe even what we'd love to see on Sunday. And then we'd come to Sunday and we'd feel like, dang, man, I wish we could record and play what happened on Thursday at breakfast for everybody, and
lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, that's the way I felt today, man. I really enjoyed the minutes before even that we were able to chat about this. So
I love it, bro. It's so fun to chat with you. And I guess just as we get ready to sign off here, I just would say to everybody, remember to join us next month for a different kind of happiness. I'll be joined by a friend of mine next month as well. And I guess the last thing I'd say, aside from thanks, Kent, for joining me, but I guess the best is still yet to come. This is certainly not it. So be keeping an eye on heaven, as heaven is closer than we think. So thanks for the time, man. It's been great chatting with you, brother. Anything you want to say as we kiss off here?
No, I know there's a lot of people out there who listen that I know, and just want to say hi, and let's keep going, man. Let's keep.
It's fun to connect at the summit with you guys, bro, and just hug your neck and see each other face to face now. And that was kind of felt like it was a little different. You hadn't done it in a while. So that was fun. That was fun just to be with you guys for that. But well, Kent, thanks again for doing this with me today, man. And give your wife a big hug for me.
Okay.
Have a great day. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next month, April 27th, 4:00. Have a great week.